There he is. There's the man. How we doing?
Sorry, I was on mute. How you
Oh,
doing?
good. Good, good, good. I just had a mic issue myself. My 2-year-old came in here like 3 minutes ago and pulled out the cord. So we're calibrated, I think.
Nice.
Such is life in the remote work world, as we all love. Cool. We'll
Uh,
get started here in just a couple minutes.
cool.
Should probably get my screen shared as we hop into it.
I had at least a few other podcast booking agents tell me they're jumping on this.
Sweet.
So there's definitely a opportunity there to, ask the audience their opinion as well and get
Yeah,
some additional um input.
love it. Do you guys see my screen?
Yep.
All right. Let me move my big old head out of the way. Awesome. As this is getting queued up here, apologies in advance to everybody. I kind of sort of lied in the initial creation of this event. If you recall, even the webinar's title is How to Land 1,500 Podcast Interviews. As soon as I sent that out, Spencer actually emailed me directly and said, "Hey, that ain't true. It's closer to 3,000 now." So I hope everyone will forgive me for that. But
In Trent's defense, it's because my website is not up to date. It's not his fault, it's mine.
hey, it's all good. It still matters. So yeah, this is another installment of our Podchaser Pro webinar series. As we've kind of gone throughout the year here, we've focused in on a few different themes. One of the themes, of course, is going to be is it getting harder to book clients as guests on podcasts. So we'll definitely be talking about that with Spencer. We'll get into a little bit of Spencer's background as well, but one of the things you should probably know is before podcasts, Spencer was pretty deep into the music industry, talent management, etc. So I'm going to pull some of those threads and see what translates from that world to the podcast guest booking space, and I think there's quite a few interesting corollaries. And then we'll close it off with predictions for 2026 based on maybe the things that we're seeing in the State of the Union that we'll give, and then how to prepare ourselves for our best year yet in 2026. So you guys have been here before. You know me. I'm trying some head of growth and strategy here at Podchaser. And maybe the one thing I'll just double click on a little bit is, yeah, I used to run Podchaser Connect, which is our guest booking agency that sat on top of the Podchaser Pro platform once upon a time. That agency's since been acquired, but the reason why I'm bringing it up is I've got a lot of firsthand experience now. I've not booked 3,000 interviews. Our team was doing about 80 interviews per month on behalf of our clients, but we had as many as 8 people on our team at one point in time. So for Spencer to have the throughput that he does for the types of clients that he has for the like really awesome podcasts he's been able to book his clients on. And it's all a one man show, Spencer. Do you have any other support? Yeah.
No,
So
I've got a scheduling assistant and, you know, someone that sometimes helps me research some additional shows, but all the
yeah,
all the outreach and stuff like that is me.
awesome. So again, I had the benefit of a pretty big team behind me. Spencer's a solo dude. So if he can do it, there's probably going to be some learnings for all of us here in the crowd and in the audience. And I'm excited to get into it with Spencer. So again, for those that don't know, Spencer is the founder of Outlier Audio. Full disclosure, Outlier Spencer, Podchaser Pro customer. So again, just want to make that abundantly clear here at the outset. And he's booked over 3,000 guest appearances, like we talked about. And the interesting thing apart of all of that is that's total over 3 million listeners for those guest interviews. We referenced this before, but some of like the interesting shows that he's been able to book for clients include Motley Fool, So Money, Wild Ride with Steve-O, James Altucher Show, and many more. Spencer, is there anything else you want to clue in the audience about you or your background?
No, not particularly. I mean, I can dive into, my background music if you want me to, but that's up to you.
We'll save that for a couple slides from now, but yeah, we will definitely be deep diving into it. So
Cool.
great. Now, the question that I've personally been asking, and a lot of our clients have been asking, especially over the last, call it 6 months or so, but really since the beginning of the year, is it getting harder to book podcast guest appearances? And if you guys were with us, we did two different sessions about this. Part one, which was back in June, and then part two, which was, I believe, mid-September. And we went into a pretty deep dive about some of the anecdotal information that we had from the June session. And then we parlayed that into some more data-backed research in the September session. So if you haven't checked those out, they are up on the YouTube channel. Go back and review them. I'll put a link in this presentation, so when it does get distributed a couple days from now, you'll be able to reference those videos and those slides as well. But to kind of kick us off here, Podchaser has a few working theories as to why this question, rhetorically, might actually be true. And the first one comes through format changes. And when we're talking about format changes, there's a couple different ways we define format. One is the actual format of the show. So there are fewer guest host Q&A interview shows that we're seeing launched, especially in 2025. But there's also this rise of video podcasts. There's a lot more in-person studios recordings that are happening. So, Spencer, I'll throw it to you. Have you seen a change in show formats, and is that potentially a reason why it could be getting harder for folks to secure guest interviews?
Off the bat, I will say I think that making any wide sweeping statement about the industry as a whole is silly because off the bat, we know every single podcast operates in its own way. And there's also subsects within industry and like where someone's at in their show and the season of the show. To your point about some people doing more solo, I have seen that there are more shows that after 4 years of having an audience, they had a lag in their production and had to do a solo episode. And like, wow, this was like one of my most listened to. This says that the audience I have built really wants to hear more from me, or maybe they just like it more, and I'll try with that more often or entirely. But also, a new show with somebody that has no audience whatsoever being solo, it might you might not get anything out of that. The whole reason that people started with interviews to begin with as a way to maybe piggyback off their network and also build your own thought leadership. And maybe it does take 50 episodes of you being able to piggyback off of someone else to actually build any of that audience. So I do think that this is really like it's really circumstantial to each individual show and maybe some industries. Um, if you look at the real estate space, there's really like not many people doing solo episodes because the whole point of them doing the real estate stuff is to network further, get a new investor, make a new connection, whatever it might be. And I don't know how much doing solo episodes is going to help them unless they have an additional product to sell, like a course. But if they don't, you might as well just keep doing the interview model. And so this could also transfer over to health. Maybe someone in a health space is like, and health is one where I see there are far fewer shows that have that perfect 5-star review because people disagree with health opinions so much more. There are far more shows that have like less than 4 5-star reviews in that space because there are a few people that just didn't agree with it, with what the host had to say. So maybe they're like, or they didn't agree with the person they platformed. And they say, you know what? I'm not going to platform as many people anymore because it just results in more animosity from some listeners if they don't agree. But they at least they respect what I say. And if I have 45 minutes to myself to give my perspective, even if they don't agree with it, they'll at least see where I'm coming from and maybe not leave a bad review. So this really is like industry specific, show specific, and kind of comes down to like what the goal of the host is.
Yeah. Classic answer is it depends, right? And to your point about the broad sweeping statements such as this, in the promo leading up to this webinar, I was on Reddit just cruising through, and I like to use Reddit to source information, some ideas, what kind of questions people are asking, etc. And there was a question in the podcasting subreddit that said, or there was a statement in the subreddit that said, uh, is podcast guesting dead? And I posted it. We both know Kevin. Kevin runs Grow the Show. And obviously, I included that as part of like clickbait to get people to check it out, see what our opinions are about that. Is podcast guesting dead? Now, to your point, there's a huge caveat with that question in that that's talking about guesting from an individual podcaster going on somebody else's podcast to try to build that bridge between the audiences. So to have
Mhm.
like a sweeping statement such as that, yeah, it's not going to be
And
ubiquitous for everybody. And even if you go through the comments, and I'll link that in the presentation after we distribute it. But you've got a lot of different people, including podcasting legend Dave Jackson, weighing in saying, no, like this is still a huge part of it. But in any case, did you any other thoughts on Kevin's or the post that called out Kevin's statement that podcast guesting is dead?
yeah, well, Kevin was actually one of the prime examples that actually brought me this because he's the only podcast on podcasting I check out, somewhat frequently. And him talking about going more solo wasn't even necessarily about listenership. He just said, I saw more people book calls with me when I did solo. His podcast is a business to business podcast that's hopefully a funnel. It's not Call Her Daddy where it's meant to be entertainment value.
Yep.
So that's again, it comes back to who you're talking about, what their goal is. Um, and his other point was like, I just did not like I did not get to give my opinion on things as much when I was interviewing other people. I want to be able to do that. So it made total sense. And but not everybody is looking for that. Some people do want to be entertainment. They want to build an audience further. It's not booking calls. Their
Yeah.
product is different, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and again, that's a huge point to make, and one of the reasons why this is the shameless plug of Podchaser Pro, right? Like you should be able to go through a podcast and understand, is this podcaster an entertainer? Are they an information steward? Are they trying to shill like their own product or service? And if you listen to a handful of episodes and there are interstitial breaks or pre-rolls or mid-rolls where the podcaster is talking about promoting their course or joining their newsletter or whatever the case might be, like it just puts the podcast in a different light. And that's why we have things, tools and frameworks we use, like the 4A's framework. So if like the person is shilling their own product or service, and that's like their primary reason for having a podcast to begin with, like we need to be able to identify that. So maybe in part of your pitch, if you have recognized that over the last 5 episodes, they've talked about their course, what can you insert into a pitch that's going to help them move more courses, right? And again, maybe that's sharing across social, maybe that's giving a rubber stamp of approval on the course, maybe it's buying a select number of courses for certain listeners, whatever the case might be. But this really comes down to like the research phase and something that
Yeah.
we far too often see people just completely overlook. They throw in the category of show they want to get in. They maybe use some audience demographic filters to whittle that down, but then they're just kind of bludgeoning the podcast host and their guest pitch to say, yeah, you got to have my guy or gal on. And there's just it's doing a disservice to you, to your client, if you're only approaching podcasts that way.
Right. Agreed.
Cool. So moving into our second theory as to why it could be getting harder to book guest appearances, and that is the what I call avalanche of AI slop. Um, Obviously, AI isn't going away. It's a huge part of most people's day-to-day lives. We use it for quite a few things, including data, including some content creation, content ideation, graphic design, etc. But when it comes to pitching, I have seen again in Reddit discussion forums and on social media. I've seen people, podcast hosts, podcast producers, taking screenshots of like very clearly AI generated slop as guest
Hmm.
pitches. And what happens when it gets a lot easier to send email in mass, and we've seen this in like sales organizations, thanks to tools like Outreach or Sales Loft. I mean, dating back almost a decade at this point. all of a sudden inboxes get incredibly noisy. And when inboxes get noisy, it's very difficult to find that signal. So even if you write a great guest pitch, now you're not just competing with the host's attention or the producer's attention, but also all of this additional kind of nonsense that exists in there. So curious from your perspective, Spencer, is AI an additive tool specifically when it comes to guest pitching?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be the person that just needs to fill a spot and you hit their inbox at the right time. And let's look at the reality. It's not just they're getting more pitches. If they ordered from Domino's one time, Domino's emails you every single day. Most of these people are not podcasters full time. They have a business or many businesses. Um, and this is just like one part, there's there any podcaster isn't getting at least 50 plus emails a day is probably an anomaly across the span of their life. That's where follow up is really important. That's where some real human element is important as well. And I also know that different industries of podcasters resonate with different types of pitches. So I will say any advice I give on pitching, you might know better in your industry. I was on a summit with some people a few weeks ago where they really crafted full stories for their clients and the shows that they were going on. And if you're talking to a podcast about like mental health and trauma, a story is important there. Like you can't just say I had trauma, I want to come talk about it. But again, if you're coming back to business or marketing or sales, those people want to see more tactical information. What's the value prop, not what's the story you're going to tell necessarily. And so you kind of have to cater this to the industry, and then that should help you stand out amongst whatever ChatGPT is putting out there. Now, I mean, if someone gives me a biography that's 5 paragraphs long, that needs to get down to about two.
Hmm.
And I've taught my GPT the way I pitch and what it is I'm looking for, and I ask it to condense it. But I then don't leave it to AI to research the shows or just put it in AI's hands to get the results. Um, I use some of the nuances I have from the music industry in my pitch. Lots of people, if you ask the people that consult or have a course or something on pitching, most of them say you should do something that really shows the host you've like listened to the show or you're a big fan or whatever. In the music industry, we didn't say we love your venue. We'd love to play there. You told them who you had available. Here's the date. Are you interested? You talked to them like they were your peers, not like you were talking up to them, asking for this huge favor. And that was something I brought over that's like, it's not ego based. It's just like, I know that a show might be way bigger than I might be, reaching up, but my clients are my talent. I've got talent. You need talent. Is this a fit? And I do think that that is inadvertently made my pitches stand out amongst all of the shows that were AI generated that started with, I loved what you said on this episode. Now, also, like, I don't want it to be lost that if you're pitching to a really big show and you are a big fan, having sincere, legitimate connection to that show and personalization will go a long way. But
Yeah.
don't pretend. If you don't have that, don't include it. It's not helpful. And I've taken calls with, companies that are trying to do what Podchaser does, but add AI to it and be an all-in-one CRM outreach. And they show me that their default is adding that. I loved what you said on this episode. And that immediately kills it for me. Like even the idea of trying a demo, I just why? Like you clearly don't understand what this is or how this works or what should be done in this service. Um, so I do think that that's like AI has a place, VAs can have a place as well, but nuance is really important.
Yeah.
And understanding that, like if you're working with financial planners or like CPAs or something, Man, it's almost a waste to even be pitching to a show that's in that space in like March, knowing that tax season is coming up. You know, if you don't
Amen.
know
Yeah.
that about your industry, that's silly. And so half my clientele is in real estate because I'm a novice real estate investor. Now, the other half has expanded outside of that, and I've done a wide variety of things, but I'm also not signing people on for like a commitment of like 50 podcasts that I'm jumping into a brand new industry. I can book just about anybody 5 podcasts in any industry by learning a little bit about and understanding their value prop. Um, and so it is really helpful to understand you like zero in on an industry if you can and learn as much about it will go a long way in dealing with
Yeah.
these people. And that also comes back to like I have connections. I work with a lot of shows regularly. So for me, is it getting harder to book? Not necessarily because half the interviews I book are repeat relationships I've
Yeah.
built. But I can't necessarily say that like doing cold outreach is getting easier either. You know,
Yeah.
it's not like I'd make a new connection with a brand new show every day. I'd say it's more like one or two a week I get a new connection with.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things that I want to double tap on. And then the first is understanding like who your clientele is and who your client base is. And I remember we were at Podcast Movement in DC last year, and we were talking about, hey, we've got some clients that they want a more fully managed service. I always think about you, think about Outlier, and I kind of give you like the 2 sentence pitch. And like, yeah, we could probably do it, but like my sweet spot is really with X. Whether I think we were talking finance, real estate at the time. It's like, cool, that's great. Like if you know where you excel, like you should be able to kindly, respectfully turn opportunities away instead of just chasing the dollar. So I think that's one
Hmm.
thing that I'm not seeing enough of our clients really understand is like what is the universe that my client plays in? What do I know about it? And then how do I build a map or create a map that overlays the podcast landscape on top of that? Because to your point, and I want to talk about this a little bit deeper in our next slide, like so much of this comes back to relationships. And I can say confidently, like when we were running the guest booking agency, like there were a handful of shows that we knew because we had worked with them before. They appreciated the way we pitched. They appreciated kind of the quality of guests that we would bring. They would actually reach out to us and say, hey, do you have anybody in XYZ disciplines? We would really like to bring them
Hmm.
on. We know who you represent. So again, we'll get deeper into that here in a second. But again, going back to the AI side and the pitch slop or the AI avalanche, as I called it. Just a little teaser. We're working on a piece of content right now. I'm talking to a lot of podcast production agency companies as well as individual producers of shows, et cetera. I've got like a standard list of 6 questions that I'm asking them and just basically requesting their input on. And one of the questions is like, what percentage of podcast guest pitches do you respond to? And not to shock or alarm anyone, but so far the results have been anywhere between 1% to 5%. And it's not because every single one of them is garbage. It's not because like they're just not taking guests on. It's just because there's so much noise in their inbox. They conceivably can't get to every single pitch that lands in their inbox. So, and
Yeah.
again, these production agencies are managing about 25 different shows each. So they're doing this across, we're talking close over 100 podcasts at this point. We're sampling from. So, in any case, I think there's some sage advice there too. What about the idea of increased competition? I can say that 2025 has been a great year for Podchaser. A lot of increased demand in podcast data. A lot of clients are asking their PR agencies, their fractional comms people that might be working with them or their in-house teams saying, hey, podcasts seem like a pretty big deal. We want to be on them. Our competitors are going on them because every time I log into LinkedIn, I see the enemy CEO posting clips of his last guest appearance. And as a result, if we've got more people trying to get clients booked as guests on podcasts or themselves booked as guests on podcasts, and we've got fewer shows that are releasing in like the standard guest host Q&A format, that's going to do something to the elasticity of supply and demand, right? So
Sure.
when you see podcast guest booking agencies, and obviously that could be segmented out from a larger PR world, or its own separate cottage industry that exists within the broader podcast landscape. Are you seeing more competition? Are you uh, feeling the heat like you see now that we live in like this laptop era, right? Like you get a mic, you get a camera, you post on LinkedIn a few times. Like it's not that hard to get clients, especially if you're worth your weight. But do you see increased competition as being a potential factor in all of this?
Um, yes and no. I mean, when I started this in 2020, I think I found 7 real agencies I could find, and 2 were already defunct at that point. Um, some of the remaining ones were like Valet and Interview Connections, and some of the other leaders. I've definitely seen a lot more small agencies or VAs pop up, or just individual service providers. Um, but there's still like so many shows and so many people that want to get on podcasts. So like I don't look at anybody as competition. Also
Yeah.
because I mean I know that like I don't see any of them going to the real estate conferences like I do, like
Yeah.
I am. And also I think if you've booked big shows, you let people know. I'm not seeing them really boasting the success of the shows they've been on. But also like I think part of the problem is that, to your point, the CEO that sees competitor CEO on show, the expectation that like all of these people believe they should be on a top 50 podcast is insane. Um,
Thank you.
and it's not because they're not good at what they do, but like being a billionaire is a really big deal. There's also tons of billionaires. Like it's not like there's only 5 of them. Being a doctor and having credentials is a big feat. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of doctors in across industries. So realizing what is a unique story and what is the real value prop needs to be communicated to some of these clients. Like not everybody is a fit for podcast, let alone more than mid-sized podcast. And so that competition, whether it's like there's more people selling this service or there's more people reaching out to Diary of a CEO or whatever, most of those people probably should not be reaching out to Diary of a CEO. You know,
Yeah.
um, in music, uh, in music, it's very common if you work in the industry, you get guest list spots, and if you know somebody, you try to get a guest list spot. For about a full decade, I had one friend that was my plus one in the music industry and vice versa because we knew that we knew how to act and we knew how we should be presenting ourselves, who we should be talking to, and what we should be saying. You don't bring in somebody guest list. You don't bring in someone guest list that's going to go fanboy over the artist. And same
Right.
thing, you can't just submit every client to Rogan or Diary CEO or Lewis Howes just because they want it. You have to know like when to shoot your shot. And it's important that the person that is receiving that email, assuming they do open it, even if it's a no, understands you had a good reason for submit. You had a good reason for actually thinking this is a fit and that they might actually consider it.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to continue to be harder for everybody if some of those expectations aren't put into place, that like financial planners are generally not going to get on big investing shows because by law, financial planners mostly do the same thing. And it's
Yeah.
not very unique. Most of them are not investing experts whatsoever. They take people's money and put it into index funds or some other approved financial product. And that is not unique. And they should most likely not be being pitched to huge investing podcast, you know?
Yeah.
This is important stuff, and that a lot of people I think miss is like just because you're a business coach does not mean that you should be on School of Greatness.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure the question that's on the tip of everyone's tongue, especially if you're dealing with clients, is how do you communicate proper expectations for the real universe of shows that you could expect to be on?
Yeah, I was talking with Brittany Martin about this a little bit yesterday.
Shout out Brittany.
Um, Coming from music to podcast was great because in music you really have to stroke egos and treat adults like children and protect their feelings. If you're working in the business to business podcast space, you might still have to stroke a little bit of ego, but not nearly as much. You can talk to them like adults. If they are a business coach that thinks they should be on Lewis Howes, means they also understand personal development and should be able to take feedback. And I am grateful that I can say I do know the right people to get this to for a lot of these shows. But I also say, dude, it's incredibly unlikely. Even if we're right, I think about a podcast that releases one interview a week. If you're at that size, even if you're just a mid-level size, let's assume 80% of the guests you're getting at that point are people you know or referrals from people you know. Then there are then there are like maybe 15% are I saw this person on social media. They had a good book. Their PR person, this is clearly going to be a bestseller. The thing that comes up throughout the year that is catching steam or is the hype person. Then that leaves like 5% to be that unique story, that person that doesn't have a huge social media following, but had a story or a topic that the host really wanted to platform. And that means 5% of 50 is only two and a half.
Yeah.
So like this isn't even necessarily about competition or deserving. It's just like the math. I mean, and then if a show ends up doing daily, that actually makes it way easier for you to get your person on because there's now so many more opportunities there. Um, that is also the cool thing about this when it comes to that question of like, is podcast guesting dead or is it getting harder? That might be the case, but there's also far more opportunities that used to be around. I think about if you put out a book 20 years ago and you hired a real publicity company and you wanted to go on all of the morning shows. I don't know how many there are. There's one or two morning shows per network. So let's just say there were 2 dozen. You only had to manage 2 dozen relationships there.
Yep.
In the podcasting platform, now every single person that was on the morning show can start their own in the form of a podcast. And so there's now hundreds, if not thousands, of options instead of just those 2 dozen. And so that might mean you have to do more outreach. There are some people that really pride themselves on the fact that they craft super personalized pitches and they can do 10 for 10 on their outreach and landing their clients. I don't think that's realistic, to be quite frank. I don't think it's realistic if you want to have more than a handful of clients. And I don't think it's realistic in just like getting true results. That's really easy to do with low-hanging fruit. But like, even if you have a big name, they're not a fit for every big show. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Well, the math problem is the problem, and I think the more that we can figure out how to solve for that, and you laid out some great things. Like we always talk about frequency of publishing, right? Like more frequently they publish, more shots on goal, more content they need, more likely. So
Yep.
we're absolutely aligned with that. But to your point about hosts and producers sourcing from their immediate network, obviously it's going to make up the lion's share of it. And people who always say, "Oh, I want to be on Rogan." Where do you think Joe Rogan gets his guests from, right? Like he's got young Jamie that's doing research. He's got people. You already know that he's got a short list of 25 to 50 guys and gals that he's always going to have on the show, especially when they need quote unquote filler content. He's looking for the rising star, get them on, and he's got
Hmm.
the vast majority of his schedule already booked out. So like to break through the noise for someone like a Rogan or Lewis Howes or Stephen Bartlett, like you have to be extraordinary, not
Hmm.
just checking the box. Yep, sent the pitch to Rogan. Here we go. So I definitely appreciate that. Now, moving on to podcasters being more discerning, and this kind of goes part and parcel of what we just talked about, but I think discerning will break down into a couple different ways. One, I would look at it from there are a lot more booking agencies that are on the podcast side now, as opposed to like the guest booking agents. Like there are people that are responsible, much like from network television days, where they've
Sure.
got somebody who's sourcing, they're going through, they're researching, etc. One really big one is Central Talent Booking. They
Yep.
have posted quite a bit, and if you go to, I forget their founder's name, but she's been in the business for a
Joanne.
long time. Yep. She goes through and looks at like the top 10 Spotify charts for 2025. And lo and behold, like six of the top 10 shows on Spotify, Central Talent
They
Booking is
represent.
responsible for bringing those folks
Right.
onto those shows, right? So that's like, it's a big deal. So you're not actually going through the producer, you're not going through the host, but you're actually going through a third party who probably has some version of a brief that they're looking for. It's probably a little bit more sterilized. But like that's a reality that we have to face, especially when it comes to larger shows. So if you want to eschew that aspect of it, like automatically go from power score 100 to probably 85 and then start looking 84 and below, because typically those shows aren't going to be sourced with a third party booking agency sometimes. Not every
Right.
time, but a lot of the time. So that's one element of the discernment. The second is production value has increased significantly, and part of that is just coming off the back of the video podcast boom. And when it comes to like the video podcast world, and I don't want to go too deep into this, but when production value is higher, a format such as this where we're talking to each other through our cameras and on Zoom or Riverside or Squadcast or whatever, it doesn't get that same feel. So with a lot of the video podcasts now, they're requiring in-person video recordings, in-studio video recordings. And I know I've seen you actually fly with a client out to an in-person studio to sit down and do a recording. Do you
Hmm.
think that is something that kind of plays into this discernment element as we talk about the difficulties of guest booking?
I mean, it definitely creates a financial and time commitment hurdle. And but there are still good opportunities in that for the person that's unknown. I have a person that I'm working with right now in mental health. She came to me because she's unknown. She wants to get on podcasts. And she did just have like an invitation to a show in Scottsdale if she wanted it. She did decide it's not the time to spend the money on that right now. So that is a legitimate thing. But like that podcast was not, they were totally open to have this unknown person. They weren't needing, just the biggest names in mental health. And it's, I like this because especially with more studios popping up or the ability to build your own home studio or whatever it is, like there are tons of successful people that have a few grand to drop on something like this or are willing to pay the money for good content in a studio, even if it's not the most cost effective way to be doing their podcast because they can repurpose it on LinkedIn.
Yep.
It's more attractive to those bigger names and that type of thing. Um, so like I don't necessarily, there's definitely a trend upward, but the traditional podcast is still the easiest to roll with. And that's definitely still going to be the lion's share of where interviews are getting booked. But let's see in 3 years. Does every city have three times as many podcast studios and they then have to bring down their pricing to be competitive? Maybe there's far more opportunities. And if that's the case, that could be where it's so much easier to set people's expectations.
Yeah.
Because if it still looks good, they might not care that it's not the biggest show in the world. If they have five in high quality 4K podcasts they did that now their marketing team can use for LinkedIn or whatever it is, that could help this expectation problem a lot.
Yeah.
Um, I did just want to touch on, I did ask someone from Central Talent Booking in preparation for this, what are they seeing? Luckily for all of us agents, most people don't know that that company exists. VAs don't know about it. Assistants don't know about it. And so the response I got from them is actually podcast pitches are down for them.
Mm.
And he's like, it might just be the end of the year. It might be the clients themselves are getting fewer pitches. I don't know. But that was just, I expect him to come and say, for him to be the highest metric of like, I get 200 AI pitches a day. He's like, no, pitching is down. He's also like, what's a VA? He didn't know. So like it's a very different industry. If you actually have people that can like kind of break through to that and a different experience overall. And I've booked probably 2 dozen interviews with Central Talent at this point. So I work with them a lot. And to your point about like figuring out kind of the cadence and working with these people, the pitch I have for everybody else, the format works the same for these guys. But I also, find myself having some questions. If it's a more general conversation podcast, do I need to propose topics? I don't know. Like it's more
Right.
general conversation. So there are some nuances there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up that nugget about Central Talent. Obviously, they're amazing. There's a reason why they represent so many of the great podcasters going today.
Yeah.
Um, on the topic of in person and specifically as it pertains to setting expectations, I was working with a client in the dating space, and they have an awesome annual report. They've got credentialed researchers that work on it. They're also doing, time and a half working as like university researchers, et cetera. Got them an opportunity on the Whatever podcast, which is one of the bigger dating podcasts. And they're like, yeah,
Yeah.
we don't know who this person is, but we'd love to have them on. And whatever you want to say about the Whatever podcast and kind of how they go about doing things, it's like an extremely viral sensation in a lot of ways. Like when they post clips, like they're going mega viral, it's getting retweeted and reposted by all of these cloud accounts, etc. And like, yeah, one condition is they have to be at our Santa Monica studio to do recording. And it's like, how am I going to get this person from the East Coast all the way to Santa Monica when there's not necessarily a budget for it, but the same company that's the employer of this guest, they're spending money on Super Bowl commercials, but they're not going to greenlight a $4,000 plane ticket to Santa Monica. And it's like the earned
Hmm.
and owned and shared value of that media hit, especially as it gets distributed across all the social channels, et cetera, like it pale in comparison. So we're bringing up the in-person stuff, the video kind of boom, et cetera, to hopefully realign expectations for clients. And again, it's not going to be every single show. It's not going to be every single time. But when you do get an opportunity like that, clients need to be prepared to have that conversation where they are going to be able to capture a significant, uh, windfall gain from having some of these higher production shows. So cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now flipping the page, how are we doing on time? We're looking good. This is where I really want to dig into some of your background and see some of those corollaries that exist. You already touched on a few of them, but the tour manager philosophy. And again, you've been in the music industry, you understand how this game works. I'll just give a quick anecdote. So when I was first approached by Bradley, Podchaser CEO, about taking over day-to-day operations for Podchaser Connect, my immediate response was no. And then it was heck no, because I had come from an agency world. I'd spent the last decade plus working in agencies. I just knew I didn't have the mind share to be able to bounce between multiple clients, understand them deeply enough, build these maps of which podcasts are going to overlay perfectly into their worlds, et cetera. And it just didn't seem like it wasn't what I wanted to do. There's a reason why I came in-house at a SaaS company as opposed to still living in the agency world. And the way that Bradley got me to say yes to this was actually by saying, imagine you are the connector. You are the person that is the conduit between all of these great shows and all of these great guests. And your job is just to plug it in. And in a lot of ways, what I pictured in my head was kind of like that Ari Gold character. And if you're not a fan of Entourage or never heard of the show, it's played by Jeremy Piven. He's, a
It's my
facsimile
favorite
of
character in TV.
yeah, facsimile of a CAA or otherwise similar Hollywood agent. And I thought I could kind of do that. That strokes my ego a little bit. I think I might actually be interested in doing this. So that was kind of the mentality that I applied to running this team, building out our processes, building out our playbooks, et cetera. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And if you have that kind of mindset, it can help you go much further in the podcast guest booking space than you otherwise would have been if you were just viewing yourself simply as a PR person, right?
Hmm.
So tell me about your story, some of those learnings and how you served as that conduit.
Yeah, I mean, so I started booking concerts in my hometown when I was 15 because I wasn't good enough to be in my cousin's band, but I still wanted to support them. And I lived in a farm town. There was nothing to do. Um, and that turned into me running some small record labels and doing tour booking and a little bit of tour management and running some festivals. But the way when I got out of the industry, what I realized, taking away the titles was that my job was to support talented people. Um, and like I never had ideas that I was going to be the person that changed the world, but maybe I could help the people that will. And so, to your point, there are companies that are in this space that you can very clearly tell they came from PR or they came from marketing and just decided to hone in on this type of marketing. They have different names for it. I started calling myself a podcast booking agent, not even knowing if that was a real term. But I looked at it like I was supporting talented entrepreneurs and investors and thought leaders, and the podcast was the place for them to perform. Now, that then led into understanding that, like, again, what I said before, not everyone is necessarily like talent that's going to sell tickets. And if they are, you still need to be offering them something unique. Every every industry and genre of music has tons of bands that fall under rock, that fall under hip hop, that fall under metal. It's the five members of that band that are supposed to figure out how do we make ourselves sound different from the other ones. And you still have to do that with your clients to kind of um, back to the financial planner point. Like I worked with tons of financial planners early on, and there's only one in specific I could say really. There are two that I thought had unique perspectives that we were really to hone in on. One was somebody that worked with people that were suddenly single. So it either means they were unexpectedly widowed or got divorced. He knew some of their pain points that were separate from just let me put your money into index funds. I also worked with someone that was, she was a first generation Chinese immigrant. Her parents had an import export business and they ran it themselves. And when her dad was diagnosed with a terminally ill illness, her mom had to take care of him for 8 years. The business fell apart. It wasn't prepared. There was nothing set up for them to sell it. And so she works with these late stage mom and pop business owners to help them understand that like you can't write everything off if you're getting ready to sell. You need to show profit and helps them prepare for that. So you have to be able to do that with every client. You can't just go in and say this person can talk about marketing, can talk about relationships, can talk about trauma, whatever it is. Now, I also think there's a bell curve to that. Like, if you're working with someone that is very well known in their space, I just booked some podcasts for Tom Bilyeu. Tom is known for Quest Nutrition, but
Yep.
that's not what he talks about these days. So I actually had a really hard time thinking about like, what am I pitching here? Because what he wants to talk about is not what he's known for. But I also recognize that like for the right shows, a bad person, a person that knows nothing about podcasting will just email and say, I'd like to be on your show. The bell curve of that on the other side is I reach out to someone that has a big podcast and say, Tom Bilyeu wants to be on your show. The person over here gets a no because they know nothing about pitching themselves. The name over here alone gets them a yes. And
Yeah.
that bell curve kind of exists in all of this. Um, but I think meeting in the middle, like how do I present them again as a peer, not saying, hey, I'm reaching out for potentially maybe coming on to your Steam podcast. Like, don't say that shit. Like, go in, like you have something, some value to provide. They're a peer. You are providing a service for them as much as they're providing a service. It might be outsized, but they still need guests. That's what you're
Yeah.
trying to fill. Um, Show the unique value prop. Try not to take too much of their time with the pitch itself. Don't make it a novel. And like this all comes back to what can we do to hedge our bets? You know, that's what I'm always looking for is like, what is the little thing I can do to at least make this a little more likely, knowing that this podcast is getting 50 pitches a day.
Yeah.
Um, so I I
Yeah.
think
No,
that
it's
I hope that answers the question, but
it
that's
does.
where this, my past experience kind of lays into all this.
Yeah, and for the Podchaser folks that are on the webinar with us now, we spent about an hour yesterday talking about the bell curve or the midwit meme curve. So
Oh,
that's a
good, because I
little
just made that up in the shower today in
no,
preparation of this.
no, it's tried and true. You talked a little bit about how you would approach different venues and the directness, the maybe authoritativeness with which you could actually send an email to somebody or call somebody to get an act booked at a festival or a venue. I want to go a little bit deeper on that and also ask if there are any other things that you've translated from music into the way you approach podcast guest booking.
Yeah, I mean, let me be clear. I did not work for William Morris or CAA or UTA. I was direct because I didn't have anything to brag about with my little metal bands when I'm trying to book them on a Tuesday in St. Louis.
Yeah.
That was why I had nothing else to go off of. Like, you can only describe five screaming metal bands so many ways, you know? So I didn't try to do that. And so, but what I recognized coming into, like, all of my pitches start the same way. Person's name. I'm reaching out about so and so being on show to discuss, and I go with my three leading topics. I have, especially for the busy assistant, entrepreneur, host, gatekeeper, whatever it is, I just have so little confidence that they are going to read even my short two paragraphs to get down to the topics to see the value prop. However, if you can show them what the value prop is on the front end, they might read that longer bio. You still don't need to have it. You should still try and have a shorter one. But like if you actually have to have a longer bio, if you catch them with the value prop on the front end, that is that's what matters to the busy person reading this, whether on their phone or on their computer. And so that directness was like, even as I continue to see so many people give the advice of like personalize as much as you can, I was like, it's so many words. Like it just makes it too long. The best
Yeah.
thing I can do is say, here is the topic you've never heard of, or here is the topic you know that you need to address quarterly, but you can't just say, okay, we're going to talk about branding again. You hit them with the value prop case study on the front end so that they can just say, I know we need to talk about this again. This fits perfectly.
Yeah.
And it is my theory that like most hosts read my opening line and say yes without reading the rest of it. I actually, that's not my theory. That is what I hope is happening. Um, and yeah, subject lines too. I usually lead the subject line with one of those value proposition topics. I even put my guest name last because my assumption is they don't know who the person is. So I better not waste the time on the front end with their name.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes the subject, like if it is a best-selling author, or I have someone currently he's a world champion fitness bodybuilder and he has a new book. I put both of those things in rather than the topic itself, the value proposition topic.
Yeah.
But for anybody else, again, I work with a lot of people in real estate. The subject line is their unique investment strategy, or you know, uh, um, or their case study that is hopefully
Yeah.
going to grab the attention. Um,
Just real quick, a couple months ago, I did a panel with the PRSA Washington, D.C. chapter, and two of the other panelists were producers for Johns Hopkins podcast and then the Pew Center for Research podcast. And one of the insights they had about subject lines for the pitches was if you can
like
write,
38 characters or
right.
something.
Well, and if you can write the episode title as the subject line, it's going to get my gears spinning and figure out how I can work this into our existing kind of content roadmap, right? So
Yeah.
like I think that's basically what you're saying. And then the second part of this is in that content piece that I teased earlier. One of the responses that I got from a guy who produces 22 different shows was that your job as the person who's pitching is to get me to read the first 3 seconds. So you've got 3 seconds to capture my attention. Once you've done that, then if you're lucky, you'll get that next 30 seconds, so if the first 3 seconds is going to be the subject line in the preview area, which is why it's so important to lead with that. If you earn that right to now take their next 30 seconds, to add additional context, your three main speaking points, etc., then they start to make that decision as to whether or not this guest is a fit for their show, right? So
Hmm.
I think what Spencer's saying here for people in the audience is now backed anecdotally by real world examples. So that's something I would absolutely share with your team out of this presentation.
Well, and I will say the other thing about like the directness and getting straight to the point is it's the opposite of sales copy and like funnel copy. Um, I have a client right now who like took my original pitch and threw it in Chat GPT to see what came out. And while the problem he's trying to address was in the first sentence, it set it off like a click funnel where you have to keep scrolling to find out more. And it's also very like it's very transparent what he's trying to sell
Yeah.
on the first. And like it's important to remember that at least for most investing or business to business or entrepreneurship or any of that stuff, you're not supposed to be selling anything. You're supposed to be teaching.
Yeah.
And so making sure that this comes back to the AI stuff and the VA stuff and is just like you can really set yourself apart by not sending people sales copy as your pitch. You
Yep.
need to send value prop education and make it very clear that like that's what that's what you're proposing here, not an overview of their product.
Yeah. Love
Um,
it.
but yeah, like that something like that 38 characters or something like that, and it's even shorter on mobile. You got to account for the fact
Yep.
that some people are reading this on their phone, you know?
Yeah, exactly. In the interest of time, knowing that we've got like 4.5 minutes left, I'm actually going to skip this slide just because I think we've talked about what's working, what's not. Spencer's done a really magnificent job of weaving in some of those tips and tricks. So we'll skip it for now. And I want to get into predictions for 2026 with our remaining time. And if you have questions, please throw them in the chat. We'll either try to address them as quickly as we can to the end of the presentation or maybe do a separate piece later. But your predictions, pay to play. It's a question that's on a lot of our clients' minds. Do you think pay to play is going to increase? Are you seeing more pay to play? What's your prediction for 2026 and people that are requiring a guest fee to have somebody on their show?
I mean, I'm sure it's going to continue to go up, but not to double digits of podcasts. Like it's so few people can really command that.
Yeah.
You know, there are some shows where I understand why they're asking for a fee, and there's others that where I want to be like, I hope you know I'm laughing at you because you are in no position to request that. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I go to Podchaser. I'm like, it says not great things about, you know, it's not a big show.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be doing that. I fault no one for trying to monetize their podcast how they're going to. But anyway, I'm sure it will continue to grow up with the shows that probably have grown their audience, and then a few outliers. But like, I don't expect it to become the norm.
Yeah. I think it'll be continue to be concentrated with certain networks that have built their podcast businesses off the back of social media influencers because there is that underlying understanding that if you're coming from an influencer world, like whether you're doing an unboxing or a story or whatever, like your expectation is somebody's going to pay you for that kind of content.
Right,
So,
right.
and there are a lot of them are based in LA. I've talked about some of them before. I don't think that's going to go away, but I do think that this is why research and understanding your target audience and understanding that market map, as I've discussed, is so important because like if you don't have no business pitching a show that's got an LA based studio with an influencer that's got 600,000 Instagram followers and 1.2 million TikTok followers, and you're not trying to reach a millennial fit mom audience, like don't even bother pitching, right? Like save that pitch for somebody more relevant.
But do know that most of these fees can be negotiable.
Yeah,
Like, if I ever get in that conversation with my clients, like, uh, uh, with them allowing me to,
yeah,
best I ever offer is 50%, and I go for even lower than that.
yep,
And they usually
smart.
it's usually works out if they do it.
Now, what about video or bust? I think when you and I first met, you were strictly doing the guest interviews. There wasn't a lot of content repurposing that was coming off the back of those. But now that video is more part of this podcasting motion, Are you prioritizing shows that have a video component to them?
I mean, most naturally are recording on something like Zoom or Riverside, and they're recording the video anyway and putting it up on YouTube. So it's very seldom that I actually reach out and ask for the video file and learn that it was just an audio podcast. I
Yeah.
think that it's the content's there, even if you're pushing the RSS feed, but not the video component. Most people are still putting up on YouTube. But actually, one of the things Kev Michael pointed out is like, you can't game the RSS feed. You can game YouTube.
Yeah.
You can improve upon YouTube and get better in an algorithm. So I do think that video will continue to grow. It probably should. Um, but I'm also almost exclusively a audio only podcast listener.
Yeah.
If I'm doing the dishes and like I can watch Andrew Santino and Bobby Lee on video, Bobby Lee makes funny faces, like he just stares off. Like I prefer that one in video for
Yeah.
actual entertainment. But anything education wise, I don't need to see you talking about investments. I just need to hear it. I need the learning side of it, you know?
Yep.
So it'll continue to grow for some people. It'll continue to be what it is for others. I'm sure it's gonna, but video will, I'm sure, grow.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we are at time. I want to make sure people know where to find you, Spencer. I appreciate wholeheartedly the amount of time you've been able to give us today. It's always been a great pleasure talking with you. If people are interested in Outlier, interested in Spencer, how should they find you? Where do you want to direct them to?
Yeah, I mean, you can come to my website, outlieraudio.com. My email is spencer@outlieraudio.com, and I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with other people, even the competition, just to connect and we can refer each other people. We can make introductions. Like, there are lots of people that need what we do, and we can work together. So,
Amazing. And you've also got a podcast series that discusses a lot of, I think, what objections might be to podcast guesting. I've actually listened to a few of them. You still dedicating any time or attention to those?
I just went to a podcast studio to film some content so I could actually repurpose it with another podcast booking agent, like a
Amazing.
competitor, and we might be launching a podcast off of that. Yeah, I had what was called questions with a podcast booking agent, which was just the recording of me answering questions people had on LinkedIn. So I've got like 50 episodes there.
Love that series. Yeah. Cool. Well, Spencer, thank you. Eternally grateful for your time today. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. And we'll see you on the next one. This recording will go out within the next couple of days. We'll include the slide deck and the video. And please do get in touch with Spencer if you have any other questions for him. Cheers, everybody. Till next time.
Thanks, Trent.
Thanks, Spencer. Great stuff, man. Thank you as always.
Yeah, that was fun. I appreciate it.
Cool. Cheers.
Um,
Talk soon.